Hello again, everybody. My name's Marin Braden, and welcome to my channel. I want to give every minute we have together to my special guest, Chief Midegah. So I'm going to jump right in and let him take over. But I wanted to first say, hi, David. Good to have you back here.
Hey, good to see you too. I like to talk with you. You have a really good heart.
Well, you're kind. For those of you who haven't seen the many videos on the multiple channels and hosts covering a meeting with Chief Midegah, he's been their guest to share his latest efforts to bring to light his quest for his people and for America and for himself. Or you haven't heard of the conferences he's attended of late and will yet attend in the weeks and months to come. I'm going to let David be the one to introduce himself. And that's because I most certainly, I'm just being honest, can't do justice to his bio or express it, especially in the words he uses, but with the power and sense of spirit that David himself can. And so I'm just going to let him take over. David, go ahead and introduce yourself. And then, as I suggested and invited you to do a couple of weeks ago, which you have so unselfishly accepted to do tonight, we're going to have you tell your life story from the time just before you were born, which is going to include your parents and grandparents, and then go right into when you were born and then all the way up until who you are today. And with that, it's just going to be nice for every one of us to see what you're all about and see you right visually look into your eyes and see where you're coming from. So for those watching, cinch up your seatbelts because it's going to be quite an incredible life story, I assure you. David, take it away.
That's Nin, David Taylor Barker, Indigenous Cause. Medigayo Gichi Dan and Digo Jiboy Munga Dig Sangab Nindu Dam, Maniwakan and Dunjaba. I say that I greetings. I see your spirits, I see your light. Some of you it's shadows, but some of you it's light. Hey, but we'll all get there. That's my foreign name. I consider it a foreign name, is David Taylor Barker, and my name that I know my creator knows me by is the kind man of the Ojibwe peoples. And I come
you
from.
Pull your mic up just a little bit to you, a little bit. I just
oh yeah. I'm talking
like
really low
you.
too.
There
Can you hear
go.
me now?
Yep, very good. Thank you.
And I come from the Anishinaabe deer family called the Caribou family in eastern Anishinaabe and called the Reindeer clan in western Anishinaabe. It's just the way it was interpreted by either the French or the British. So, but a caribou and a reindeer is the same thing. I come from the place that my family historically is from a sacred place called Spirit Water. And it extends from, North Dakota, Minnesota, up to Lake Winnipeg in Canada, in Manitoba. It set the invisible lines away. We know that's one area. I am from Mormon pioneer family, and I'm from, the pioneers of the Anishinaabe. So it's difficult to, yeah, it's an interesting family history where I know we're going to talk about a little bit about my history, and I don't want to do it with rose-colored glasses. So I'm going to try to keep it as right down the line as possible, knowing that people will investigate and probably go talk to family members and things. So I'll just take it down the line.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So my father is J. Douglas Barker. He's been in prison my entire life. And he went when I was 2 years old. Him and my mother, they had broken up before I was born. And so I've had a life of getting to know my father through bars, but it's okay. He's the best. He's the most encouraging father that a son could have, and he's still my dad. But my father and mother were troubled teenagers. My father came from an Ojibwe family, a Chippewa family, a mother and father who struggled with the circumstance of the American society they were born into.
Yeah.
So much so that they actually traveled to the territory of Alaska for him to be born, thinking that it would maybe change the way it was recorded. And so my grandmother, who was the best grandmother you can imagine, my father's mother, couldn't really be involved with her children as much as she wanted because of the situation in America in the 1960s.
There's a lot
and
of separations and that kind of thing.
a lot
That
of
was,
separations and a lot of movements and a lot of, but the US started this. They started this in the 40s when they took my grandmother from North Dakota to a boarding school in northern Idaho, 1,500 miles away, and her mother and father didn't know, and they had to spend 10 years to find her.
oh my goodness.
And it
I
was
think of the heart being ripped. I can't imagine if we just wear your hat and hear that, what was in the heart of that woman. And that it's just, it just
so my
makes,
grandmother didn't know how to be a parent because she didn't have a family to be in, but she knew how to be a good grandma. And my grandfather, her husband, his family also were migratory. His grandfather had traveled from North Carolina. He was a European who had traveled with a timber company that was going with John Kellogg to northern Idaho to make the largest silver mine in the world at that time.
mm-hmm.
And they first went through Oklahoma Territory and stayed in the Kiowa Nation, where he met my grandpa's grandmother. And she had been, it's an interesting story. So he had a lot of anger.
Mm-hmm.
So they migrated to northern Idaho, and where
I'm an
they
Idaho
had been,
boy, by the way. I was born in Boise. I know Kellogg, Idaho. I know the Panhandle. So
yeah.
yeah, good state.
So they were that's how they intersected, is they had traveled up there, and then they lived at the near the Kootenai Indian Reservation because that's where his grandmother could fit in. But she was an interesting story. She, my grandpa's grandmother was taken as a baby in the 1880s, and off of the Oklahoma Reserve, and she actually had two birth certificates.
Oh,
She's got a birth certificate in Oklahoma, and then they made a new birth certificate with the white family she was taken to in Michigan. And then when she was 18, she took off and went back to Oklahoma to try to find her family, which she could not find.
mm.
And then she had also shown up because she was adopted. She had also shown up after they did their rolls. And so she found the US government trying to tell her that it couldn't be her community anymore.
Wow.
And so she then met with the loggers and met a handsome man named, John David Barker, and traveled to northern Idaho. And they had my grandpa's dad, and then my grandpa and then my grandpa's dad had met a Métis. She's part French and part Chippewa from Saskatchewan, Canada.
Wow.
And they had become married and lived in northern Idaho. And my grandpa came from that. This is on my dad's side.
Yeah.
So and then he was a fascinating man. He actually built a 200-foot, 30 feet tall fishing vessel it was a big deal when they took it down the streets in Florida to the coast, and then he sailed it up to the Arctic Circle and
Wow.
fished with his sons until my Uncle Mitch died.
Wow.
And then he stopped. He fell off the boat. So I had a pretty remarkable grandpa. My grandmother just traveled a lot from North Dakota to Montana to Idaho, because that's where her family was strung across.
That's what grandmas do.
Yeah. And so that was my dad's side. And my mom's side are LDS. So they are pioneer families. They were the clothiers and smiths and millets and tailors and youngs and with even one of the first Indians married into the church. His name was Hiram Bell Bennett, who had married the cousin of Joseph Smith, Martha Smith. They shared the same grandfather.
Wow.
Martha and Joseph Smith Jr.'s dads were brothers. And that was my grandmother's matrilineal line. She was pretty, or her through her father, she was pretty. She always told me, like, the whole time when I was a kid, I remember seeing genealogy sheets like laying everywhere all the time. So I think it's, what's interesting is the tribal peoples, my father's family cared so deeply about being able to know who your ancestors were, but my mother's family were equally as obsessed with who do you come from and what's their story. And even my grandmother's mother, Hazel Ruby Millett, her grandfather was the guy who built the Kirtland Temple,
Yes,
Artemis.
I heard that. That's
So it's
marvelous.
kind of
Rich.
fascinating.
Yeah, rich heritage, both sides.
And so my grandma and grandpa grew up in Fillmore, Utah, which was the capital of Utah for a long time.
Yeah.
And, and, and they both had something in common. They both had lost their mothers when they were 12 years old.
Oh boy.
And so they really rested on each other. My grandfather had a very fascinating story of his childhood, but he was very fortunate to be with his grandparents and that they took him in and took care of him as a little boy. And it mattered to me because I remember when I was a little boy, he would tell me that when I was running through the house and maybe 11 or 12, that I remember one time he stopped me in the hallway and he said it was he said, today is the first day that I remember being home.
Mm,
And I said, what do you mean? I'm just a kid.
sure.
And he said, I was you with my grandparents.
Wow.
And could see, he was feeling that he was a kid in their home again with me as a kid in their
Through
home.
your eyes and your experience. Yeah. Yeah.
So he was a fascinating guy who got me my first National Geographic magazine, and he had a shop in his backyard, and I used to go sit as he worked on his skill saws, and I would just read the National Geographics, and he'd say, one day you're going to go around the world, so you better start learning about it now. And so they had 8 kids. They were born in Utah, lost their parents. They met each other in high school. They stayed together their whole life. And they moved numerous times from California up the coast to Oregon and Washington, and finally settling in the Lewis-Clark Valley, Lewiston and Clarkston, Washington and Idaho. And that's where my mother and my father met each other. And I even know where, but they met each other. And then my mother was a teenager who had, before they had met, she had had some scars placed on her heart and on her life that I think just really changed the trajectory of her life. And she never was able to recover from that. So, but she became pregnant as a 16-year-old. And so that's the pre-story she had a pretty remarkable family. She had, 3 brothers and, 4 sisters, and loving people that made me nothing but love in my life. I'll tell you that. So, and I love each one of them I've lived with at some part of my childhood.
Yeah. Just
totally strange. But I was born in Nez Perce County, Idaho, in the land of the Nimipu or the Nez Perce, and a white logging company. And it was a white logging company and a city. And we never actually had anybody of another race into the community until after I had been, just to say how interesting it was to grow up in this area.
I bet.
There was reservation Indians, and there was legitimately nobody who was not white European.
That was the world. That's what it was.
Complete split. And I, in the middle of that, it was part of the year I'd be treated nice, and the other part I'd be treated not so nice. But I still remember when I was in grade 5, after I had been taken from we'd found us from the wilderness. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
I didn't want you to
pass that. That's great.
No, we're going to go back to the beginning, but I did want to say that it was a very big thing for me when the first, African-American family moved into the community, and the kid came to school, and all the kids tried to fight him.
Yeah.
Just because of his skin color.
That's sad.
And we back to back whooped everybody. So, I was proud that day.
I bet you were. Well, that shows your heart. That shows your heart, David.
And we didn't even get in trouble. And let me tell you, we cleaned house. But so my mother was pregnant, and there was a debate about what was going to happen with the kids. She found out she was going to have twins, and this was quite the task for a teenage girl.
Oh man, I can't
imagine. In an LDS family.
Yeah.
And she had 2 brothers who were professionals. One of them was an electrician, and they were twins. One was an electrician, and the other worked as in senior management in Safeway.
I know
And
Safeway.
yeah, and so there was a debate about what was going to happen. Neither of them could take both kids because each of them either had a child on the way or had a child, and they were young families.
It'd be a tough burden. Yeah.
But they knew it was going to be tough on a teenage girl. And so it was a big debate about what was going to happen for me and my brother. And then kind of destiny stepped in and answered it for him. And during one of this really happened. I'm going to say stuff that seemed really bizarre.
Please.
And I remember being a kid and being told these things all the time about not to waste my breath, or my effort. I really was obsessive. I have a certain obsessive compulsive way about me with what I do because I had grandparents that reminded me continually how lucky it was that I'm even alive or making it through some of the things I made it through unscarred. Like literally, hey,
yes.
I don't remember as a kid having one spanking. Wow. And yet I was around things that we're going to talk about that were absolutely shocking. And so they during one of the checkups, one of the babies wasn't moving. Oh, was very still. Something was wrong. And so at that time Jim must have just turned to 1978, first couple months of 1978. They did a thing where they put a needle into the womb and into the baby to withdraw a sample.
Yeah, into that inner sac of the placenta. Yeah.
Yeah, and then into the body. And so
body.
I still, into my body. I still carry the scar. It's directly under my left breast.
Don't show it. No, I'm teasing you.
No.
Oh, but it's great.
It's a scar I have where a needle entered my little baby body and withdrew fluids that they then analyzed and determined that I had no white blood cells and I wasn't producing them. And so now the decision was, well, one of them is going to die. And so then the brothers of her said, then, we'll take the baby who lives. And so that was kind of my charted destiny. And then when the time came for the birth, the uncle was there with the wife and waiting for the sister to have the babies. And my grandmother was there. This was my mother's mother. And that we turned. So instead of my twin being born first, we did a turn. Like literally my twin, this is really what happened. My twin actually popped the head out, went back in, turned, and then we turned. And then I came out and they gave me to my grandmother who held me. And then my twin came out and they say that my twin was as yellow as a school bus.
This is almost like a biblical story of baby.
Yeah, that's how it was told to me as a kid too, all the time. And hey, trust me, my twin still holds it against me. So, yeah, he does. So my grandma's holding me. My twin is apparently sick and has to go into an incubator, extremely jaundiced. And then a strange thing happened. The umbilical cord that connected us, they said it looked like the side of a rainbow trout. It was painted with, this is what it was. It was painted like a rainbow trout. Now I didn't die and I was healthy. And so my grandmother named me David. And that was pretty remarkable. That's why I got named David, because I didn't die. Because she said she would tell me that you overcame death somehow. They did an analysis of the umbilical cord and found that it was coated with white blood cells, which is what caused the rainbow refraction off of it.
Which is what you were without, it seemed like.
Yeah. Somehow what caused my twin to be jaundiced is somehow before we were born. Who knows if it was week before, day of, somehow, but it must have been recent with how he reacted. Somehow his white blood cells in his body, like all of them, passed through his umbilical cord down, took a turn, and came into my umbilical cord and into my body. And because we were mirror twins, it kick-started production in me. And so then I became like more healthy than normal healthy. Okay.
But
I
it
had
left him jaundiced. It left him
yeah,
jaundiced.
but his body could recover.
Yeah.
But for me, it was that this super burst of, like they said, it must have been all his white blood cells, like just left his body and without leaving the blood. Like this is a strange thing to even.
That's a miraculous story, quite frankly.
But it happened, and it is what it is. Like it happened. This is just a real thing that happened. And Dr. Marsh was our doctor, and he knows, this was just what it is. It was St. Joseph Regional Medical Center. So I don't know. And so I lived, and then this teenage girl now had 2 kids again, and had brothers that were like, we can't take 2 kids.
Yeah.
And so we'll each take one. And my grandmother said, you're not splitting them up.
Mm.
And so my grandparents chose that they would help this, listen, they've apologized to me.
Yeah.
But they should have thought better than to leave this teenage girl with 2 boys. But it's what happened. And yeah, so we were left with her. And, there's no teenage pregnancy that works out in the betterment of the mother.
If it is, it's very, very, very rare. But it
takes a tremendous amount of family support, and there's some things that become very challenging, like school.
Oh yeah.
So she didn't complete school. It was a freshman, and she just quit. And then I just
the course of her life too. Not going to school changed the course of her life. Absolutely.
Dramatically. And so I, as a kid, and I still remember my grandma told me, because my grandmother's father came up from Utah, and Joseph Avon Bushnell. And first thing he said when he saw us is to my mother, what teepee were you sleeping in? Because we were Indian boys.
Yes.
And but it was cool because I was in that community where I could fit in with friends that looked the same as me.
Yeah.
And so, but anyway, so as a little kid, we moved a lot. We were always kind of, in the first couple years, peripheral around my grandparents. And then when I was 4, my mother got involved with biker gangs and drug trade in a massive scale, that were using the Indian reservations and using the biker gangs along the West Coast to move these things. And she hooked up with a guy whose name was Michael Frank DeGregory, who went by the nickname Duster. Mm-hmm. And he was a large voice in the West Coast drug
world. Yeah.
Drug world, and not little, like big. And he worked with a partner in Southern California named Cowboy. They took the name Cowboy and Duster, and they worked under a 7-foot-tall Indian named Art. And so I was, as a little boy, I remember, around bikers and Indians and lots of drugs. But again, today, anybody on a reservation knows that that's still what's going on. And that hasn't changed. And we got to heal our people. So I remember so there's little things that they shape your life.
Sure they do. And
so I, but I do remember before that, my mom actually met a really good guy. So let me go back. When I was a little boy, maybe 2 years old, 2 to 4, she had, 2 to 4, she had met and married a guy named John Whittington, who was another.
Father had already gone to jail, you said?
Yeah, he was gone. He was in jail. And so he didn't make a big, impactful part of my life until I was a teenager.
Okay. Yeah.
And I sometimes wonder if it was he just didn't know what to do. He's in his 20s, and he doesn't know.
That's still a baby. I'm 70 this month, and that's still a baby. 16, 17, 20, 19. They're just trying to figure, they're going across that bridge to adulthood, and it's tough.
Yeah. But I remember my mom was with a great guy and had my half brother and half sister. And then she had a problem with stability. And so she always chose to walk away from things that were good for her, for things that weren't.
Mhm.
And so we ended up in this really strange environment with these really strange people. And I remember when I first realized it was probably really strange was that I had so before it got really strange, I had fallen and severed my tongue and had walked up to my mom holding it in my hand. I was
No, it
just
actually, a
past
piece fell out of your mouth.
the whole
Yeah, your
that far
tongue, but
back.
oh my goodness.
So if you look under my tongue, which I'm not going to do it, it's really scarred.
Guard. Okay.
But blessing on the top, the whole thing completely healed with just a small bump on the side. But I I remember picking it up off the ground and holding it in my hand and taking it to my mother, and water pouring down my chest, which was blood.
Oh yeah.
And I can't imagine what that looked like to her because she
Wow.
immediately panicked and ran away.
Oh, geez. I'm
And
sorry to
so
laugh, but I can appreciate that's scary deal.
she didn't know what to do, and she had a panic attack and ran away and left a little 5-year-old boy holding his tongue in his hand. Now her boyfriend at the time, this guy that she would be with until I was about 10 years old, that who was half Indian also. He was an Indian Sicilian and had been in Vietnam, and this I think where they met most of their groupings, and he preferred to hang around um, bikers and Indians.
Mhm.
And just interesting in that he took a cold rag and got it wet and he put it in my mouth, and he took my tongue and put it in. I'll never forget sitting in a chair with a wet rag in my mouth and staring at my tongue sitting in a glass with ice,
Wow.
staring at it. And I wasn't crying. And he turned to me and said, you're a little warrior. I'll never forget it. You're a little warrior. And I just remember going to the hospital, and I remember as clear as like 5 minutes ago, them sewing it back on. They couldn't do anesthesia. And I remember
Oh my
them
goodness.
sewing my tongue back on and saying that he'll never talk again. I remember being told I would never talk again. I remember my only friend after that for a while was my dog, a black lab named Ernie, who then became intimate with me, like super close to me. Everywhere I'd go, he went. Everywhere he went, I'd go. And I started reading. I was taught by my grandmother to read and to write so that I could get what I needed. I don't remember fit in school at all. There's a period, about a half year I didn't go. And then when I went back, I didn't.
Okay,
We made it.
just had a little hiccup, and David had to go on to his phone, but everything's great. The last time, David, you were just talking about seeing your rag in your mouth and your tongue sitting in front of you. You remember it like it was just 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, so they sewed it on. And then I there's a period of time where I learned to read and write, and learned to see that my best friend dog was more human than humans. And then things, just kind of spiraled after that. Can you hear me okay?
You're wonderful. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and then it just kind of everything got strange after that. I remember one night I woke up because there was a day where this guy named Duster got all dressed in his leather outfit, and he put on these big leather things with all these Native American symbols all over him, and he was going to a very big meeting that was really important. And I just remember it like clear as day, thinking that he was fascinated by what he was wearing. And then when he came back, I remember how panicked everybody was and how they were talking panicked. And I remember going to sleep and waking up in the middle of the night as the window over my bed was shot in over me.
Oh, my
as
goodness.
I looked down the hall and I saw Duster standing and shooting out the window in the front room as people were in a field shooting into the trailer. And I jumped on the floor and grabbed my siblings off their beds and covered them with a blanket. I just was this little 7-year-old, 6.5-year-old kid doing this that couldn't talk at, like at all. And
Wow.
and then I remember my mom low crawling on the floor and grabbing us and taking us as this out of nowhere, this van came flying in as fast as it could, and we were thrown into it and it sped off as it was getting shot at. And I remember we ended up at my aunt's house and just being told, hide him. And she put us in a closet. And then a short while later, the police showed up looking for us. And I remember for a little while we were hid at my aunt's house. Now, my mom and this guy went to jail for a period of time for whatever had occurred. And I knew at that point, I didn't have a normal life.
I mean, I think not at 10,
yeah.
7, 8, 9, 10. Wow.
So no, so that's like 7. So six, almost 7. So then we end up back with my mother when she gets out. And I'm talking a little better, but I have a problem with confidence, so I just chose not to. But I was the first kid to read. They had these little thin yellow books in grade 1.
Yes.
And I read every single one of them. I up through grade 3, I was like winning all the book clubs, and could just devour books. I remember going and sitting in libraries and just reading books down the street from my grandparents' house. And then we were in this place in Clarkston now that just a massive amount of people were living in the house we were in, and bikers, and massive amount of drugs, and we're taking trips down to California. And I just want to tell you, like, this is just what it was. And with trucks full of drugs. And I remember them opening up big cattle cars, and with the cows, they would load them in with cows as well. And they would be drivers because the smell, you wouldn't smell these things. You still, yeah. So then we're at this house and we're at this place until I'm 9 years old. And I know this in a strange life that I knew was strange, because my grandparents would come and get me. My grandpa would take me out to the Nez Perce reservation for like the powwows, to walk around and see and be around elders. One of the Indians that was friends with my mom's boyfriend used to come and get us on Wednesdays and take us to a house up on Bridge Street. And me and my twin would sit in a room with an elder who would teach us to smudge, and which is just using sage. And he would talk to us about things that, I just cared that we knew. But my grandparents also took me to church. They'd come and take me to church.
On your mother's side, yeah.
Yeah. And somehow, but my grandpa, my mother's father, like, cared to keep me in contact with my tribal family. Like, he made an effort. Like, for some reason, he felt it was important that we didn't feel lost.
Or isolated from it. Yeah.
So they used to tell me, the book, I still remember I was 8 when he gave me the Book of Mormon to read. Mm-hmm. And he said, you're reading a lot of books. You should read this one. And I read like the entire Book of Mormon in like a month. Like, I just tore it up. And I begged my mom to let me see missionaries. And then Elder Zwigi and Elder Martin came into my life. And I was thankful that my mother, who was a excommunicated member, had allowed them to come into my life. And so when I had turned 9 years old in May of 1987, the very next month I was baptized. So I was baptized. I still remember it. And my grandparents threw a big party for us. I still have the pictures of the elders. If they're ever listening and they ever want to remember the Taylors, or they remember me as a little boy, I should post a picture and send it to you. But
and this was still in Idaho?
Yeah, this is in Idaho. They went on a mission to
Lewiston, Idaho.
Okay, got it.
But they were Elder Zugi and Elder Martin. And they've always meant a great deal to my life, that even if for them they were young boys, for me it was they would sit with me in this horrific home that I can't believe they were in to visit with me. And I liked to be outside. And so I would go sit in a barn behind the house, and they would just go sit with me there all, like, for a long time and spend time with me. And it was like, good boys. These are good boys. And so I got baptized, and then things got weird. So I woke up one night and was hearing, just so people know, it's not like I'm silver spoon and mouth guy. I came from a broken background. And is it okay to talk about this?
Sure it is. Sure it is. It's the truth.
Yeah, and I woke up because I heard dripping with like water, and we were in a basement that was unfinished, that had spray painted walls, like just the most horrible things that could be spray painted on walls were all around us. It was a concrete floor with Harley Davidson motorcycles parked in it, unfinished, and we had mattresses that were just thrown on the floor, and didn't even have sheets on the mattresses. And I remember hearing the stripping, and I saw a board had been placed before the door, and I went to the board, and I saw red.
Mm.
And so just on the other side of the wall was where the washing area was, and then there'd be a stairwell going up. And as I stood and watched, there were these three men, and who I assumed on the other side of them was my mother. And there were plastic bags that were on the ground, and there was a body hanging from a beam that was being dismembered and placed in the separate bags. And I stood there, not wanting them to speak. It's frozen. And I remember looking at my siblings, my half brother, and they're my brothers, but my twin brother and my little brother, who were sleeping. And come to find out, years later, we were in our 30s before I was sitting with my twin. Literally, think about this, like decades later, before I sat with my twin and even talked about it, and found out that he was pretending to sleep because he saw the same.
I was wondering that. My goodness.
He saw the same thing. And here's the great thing, later in life, when you realize this and you talk and you try to go talk about it, it's we both have the same story of what we saw. And I just remember how, I won't go into detail about it, but it was horrific. A moment that I'll never forget. And so, I went and got in bed and covered my head, and I didn't sleep all night. And I heard as they were cleaning, and they departed. And I remember in the morning going and looking, and it was as if it never happened. It was the strongest smell. And the reason that I had to get up, because the bleach smell was so strong that my eyes were like hurting very heavily. Yeah, just stinging. And everybody, and all the stuff was gone. They had taken the motorcycles out, and they had, and my mom told us to grab what we could fit in this blue old Willys Jeep that had parked outside with another one of the guys. And so what we could carry was placed in the back of this vehicle. And then we left, and we drove to the West Coast, and to people that I had never met, that she apparently knew in whatever it is they were doing, and had to use a different last name, and were put in school. And then it was as if for about a half year, we moved almost every couple weeks.
When you had a new identity for that little period.
Yeah. So, and so then pretty soon, after 9 months to close to 9 months and a year in, all of a sudden my mom's gone. And now we're with just this biker guy and his biker friends. And then we're moving around the mountains of Central Oregon and Central Washington.
They're beautiful mountains and trees. I mean, the forest is just gorgeous, but it's rustic. I mean, it's outdoors.
Oh yeah, yeah. So there's about a year and a half where just in the world. And so for me, I was very quiet, which didn't draw attention, but I didn't have the confidence to be able to have conversations. And strangely, these guys, when they were physically harming or molesting my siblings, never touched me. I remember them lining us up for times that they did in the evenings where they would just be crazy. And for some reason, always passed me by. And I sometimes wonder if it's because I just did different things. I used to get up with everybody, but then I'd leave.
Mhm.
And I would go out into nature and see how long I could stay away, and no one ever said anything. So I would spend almost every day off in nature. And then, you know, until I found that, and then it became a remarkable thing for me where I enjoyed it because I found a hot spring.
Mhm.
I found a place in the forest. I still talk about it because it was the most meaningful thing for me. What happened is I found a hot spring in the Cascade Mountains that
Your
was bubbling.
sanctuary. It's like a
Yeah, it's like
sanctuary for David.
yeah, it was shocking. It was shocking. And I dug it out and stacked rocks and would sit in it. And it literally looked as if you took a hose and put it under the ground and it was bubbling up about this far.
Wow. Bubbling like that.
Yeah, bubbling out. So I dug it out, and then each day I would go back and sit there. And then until a period of time went by and I looked up and there was a really large moose standing what must have been 50 feet from me.
That's a big
Just
animal.
standing.
Oh,
Yeah. And I had to wait till he left because I was afraid. And so then he'd leave, and then I'd leave, and then the next day I'd debate if I should go back, and I'd go back looking, and I'd sit down, and then he'd reappear. And a period of time passed, and a couple weeks, and he started cutting the distance slowly. He would just walk up and stand and turn sideways and stand there for hours.
step by step, trusting, step by step.
And then he'd leave.
Mm.
And then I could leave until finally he turned and he walked directly towards me, stepped into the little pool I was sitting in, and stood right with me. And I touched his leg and he didn't move. And I stood up and I was rubbing the front of him like a horse. And I can only touch up to just above his lower arm. And for a period of time, he would come, and every day would come and stand in it with me. And then one day, right before, just maybe a couple months before we got like saved, he would walk and stop and look at me. And so I'd follow him, and he taught me where wild garlic and wild onions and wild roots, and I was eating these things. And the strange thing is that when they found us, we were so emaciated and I wasn't as bad as my siblings, but I still have a picture of the reunion they held and how scary I looked.
Mhm.
But I sometimes wonder if even he knew that I needed to eat.
Maybe so. Yeah.
And I still take my boys now and I show them the same things that I learned then. And it's strange for me because my son just turned 9 and I'm seeing who has a completely different life.
Yes.
And I've rebuilt my childhood through the childhood of my boys. But so we get saved from that, and we're thrown in with my grandparents and then with my aunt and uncle, my Aunt Hazel, who is just the most amazing woman in my life. And then then it's like, who is this family? And my dad's mom is wanting to take us, and my grandparents are begging and pleading to let us stay in the family that we know.
Mhm.
And yeah, and so then they give us IQ tests to figure out where we're at educationally. And this is when I figured out that I was a pretty smart guy.
Yeah.
I remember I was about 12 years old, and I remember and they put us in a facility for a couple weeks as they figured out the family, like what's going on with the family? Because normally then Child Protective Services wasn't that aggressive until they had to be. And then they really wanted to know, like, what is going on with these people?
Did you ever find out who rescued you or how they came and found you and got that? Did somebody tell on that? Or
Yeah,
how-
so somehow the guy took me to see my mom,
Mhm.
and then she contacted somebody to, because
Call
I told
back.
her where we were. Yeah, and
There
she
you go.
contacted, because he wanted, something had happened where I was talking a lot. I
Your tongue
started
was
talking.
working. Your mouth was working. You were
Started
talking.
talking a lot, and these people realized I was very, very, very intelligent.
Yeah.
And I think fear set in,
Okay.
that he remembers everything.
Hmm.
And I started talking. This moose, I don't know, something strange, but I started talking a lot. And then I just remember they took me to where my mother was and drove down into the city into a place, and she was living in a place with prostitutes.
What's scary, David, is you could have been sent away and buried and nobody would have known because they knew
Never
you
would have.
talked and knew. I mean, that isn't a miracle itself that you didn't taken care of by them and just went
Yeah,
away.
no.
Wow.
Now they scarred forever my twin, with the molestations, was just something that he's never recovered from. And I don't blame him for it. But yeah, so I spent some time with my mom, and I remember I was this 10-year-old kid, 10 and a half to 11-year-old kid. And I'm holding my mother, who's talking about how she wants to die.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was in a bath, and I looked, no electricity in this home that all these women were living in. And I was in a bath, and she wanted me to get clean, and I wasn't clean. Okay. And I just honestly don't remember taking a shower. But I was wearing the same set of clothes for years, at least over a year and a half. And I remember looking out, and she was sitting on the couch or on the bed and she was going to kill herself. And I was watching it. Something about me being there and reflecting on the failures of her life and what is going on with us, and probably how emaciated I looked.
Oh yeah, just wore on her. Oh yeah.
As a 20, she's now probably 26, 27. She's probably really feeling guilt. And so she was going to kill herself. I remember she lifted a needle up, and I remember her friend walked in and hit her across the face. And I think that woke her up, because she laid down and wanted me to hold, and I held my mother. I held my mother like a child, and I was the child. And I just remember hearing my grandparents call my name. And so when I woke up, she had apparently contacted somebody, and my grandparents were there, and then the police were there, and we were just taken away.
Taken away.
Yeah, and I still didn't see my mom. But now I know that they had placed her into rehab.
Okay.
They had moved her into rehab, and then we had to go in a place for a couple of weeks where they figured us out. And then I took a test, and I remember them sitting me down and explaining with my twin, about this test. And then they separated us and explained that they couldn't tell. I just remember it just happened. It is what it is. That my score was so significantly higher than my twin that they didn't want him to. The number was so different, and so I had a very, very, very high, very high IQ. And his was high too, but it was in the higher part of the normal spectrum. And I was way outside.
That could create a bigger struggle for him. Yeah, yeah. Oh.
And now I understand why we never hung out. And, and but we never had a ability to bond as twins. While we were in the woods, I do want to share a most amazing story. Okay. There's something that we talk about quite a bit, because it's another moment that is kind of like a miraculous moment. We tried to cross a raging river in the Cascade Mountains.
I'm sorry. Too young.
We thought we could go up past the rocks and hold the rocks, and didn't realize we didn't weigh enough. And we were out moving between rocks, and we thought we were far enough that we might as well just try. And I remember, but it had rained, and it was raining, and it was flowing higher. And I could see rapids down below us. and I slipped.
Oh my goodness.
And this is one of the remarkable, this happened. My twin knows exactly, and will tell you the same. This happened. As I slipped and now I'm in the water on my back, I just threw my arm back. That's all I could do. Now, at the moment my twin sees me slip, a branch is floating in the water. And he said that he literally just reached down and grabbed the branch that was there and just held it out immediately as I stretched back, and I was holding it. And it was so miraculous to think about how I would have died right there too.
Fraction
That
of a
as
second.
I slipped and threw my arm back, the stick was just there and I was holding it. As he sees his brother slip and throw his arm back, he's moving to grab me, and he grabs a branch and just holds it up. And he's holding a rock, and he gets me to the shore, and we are weeping and crying, and I had lost my shoes. And so we go back to the camp of these guys explaining what it just had. They didn't care. What they cared about is I had lost my shoes.
Yes.
And so then they had somehow got me, I don't know where they got them, but they got me these like boats, like they must have got them out of a dumpster, but they were just like shoes with no laces. You just slip your foot in. And I had these things, but yeah, that happened. And I'm grateful for my brother that day. And I'm grateful for the fact that I had the Holy Spirit in my life in that period of my life. And, but that happened. So then I'm with my aunt and uncle and my grandparents while I'm in my early teen years. And then my mom shows back up, and it was the first time I kind of could connect that she was a normal human.
Yeah.
So I'm 13 years old, and it's the first time in my life I saw my mother as a normal human. And
you're more mature, David. You're more mature. You've matured in your thinking. Yeah. It allowed that connection.
Yeah. And I had a lot of sympathy for her. Mm-hmm. And we were slowly moved in with her. They started with the period where we could see her for periods of time, and then it increased gradually, and she proved herself, and then we were with her. And then once she had us, and she had met a very nice guy, a phenomenal man who had a great work ethic and a great character and a great spirit about him. And his name was Mike Edgar. And he still lives in Lewiston, Idaho. And he moved us into a really nice house. And it was the first time I was in like a really nice family, other than my aunts and uncles and my grandparents. And she screwed that up in a year and went back to what she was doing, and then decided she just didn't want her kids. And so now I'm a teenager, and my dad's mom then is like they're checking on us like nonstop. And my grandparents then go on a mission for 2 years. And so so this is a strange period where my grandma Patty tried to take us, my dad's mom, because my grandparents went on a mission for the church, and I'm a sophomore in high school, and I'm living with friends. And my grandmother shows up to take us. She's like, I'm taking them. And it was the first time I ever saw my mother and my grandmother like really get into it.
Oh,
like
yeah.
My dad like just pour into each other. And even though she wouldn't let us live with her, she called the police when my grandmother tried to take us because we were still minors. And so she rathered that I lived with coaches and friends. And I'm not speaking with any anger towards my mother. It was just very unfortunate that somebody would play a game like that. And so I was very lucky that my grandmother chose to continue to make the trip. And she started sending, I was 15 years old when she had sent James Greatwalker from Turtle Mountain to come see me about every 3 to 6 months. And he would stay with me for about 2 to 3 weeks. And he was an elder from there.
Your heritage on the Indian side to she's inserting it. She's feeling
with
that. Yeah.
And he taught me that the Nez Perce were, and then he'd take me out to my grandpa already took me out there quite a bit, but they're gone. And so he would come and take me out and introduced me to an really old elder in Lapway, Idaho. And he had and behind his house, he had this blue house, and behind it I remember the first time I went there, and it was just like a fence that was in a square. I was like, what is this? And and you go in, it was a purification lodge to prepare yourself for, to be initiated and taught, that you had to go into the womb and get rebaptized.
Yes.
To be able to hear further information. So I had an elder coming to see me, and I had an elder that was there who even when I got out of the Marine Corps in 2013, I was still there sitting with him. And so I was grateful my grandmother did that for me. And then I graduated, and I was working in the Valley at a Benedict's Athletic Center, and was living with coaches and friends, and spending most of my time running, in the countryside or out in Orfino or Lapway. I used to be allowed to go camp just north of Orfino. There's a sacred place to me, that there's on the side of a hill north of Orfino, there is a plateau on the side of a hill they have fruit trees planted there. And there's man-made lakes that are made there. And this was Chief Joseph's place where he put his horses.
That's a boy in paradise.
And they had fruit trees.
Okay.
How sacred were these people? But my elders taught me, they're Ojibwe. They're Seven Fires people. They had walked across. They're the same people, and and I learned that when they had got to Oregon. They lived at Wallowa Lake, and that Chief Joseph, when he went up to Montana, was trying to actually go meet the Assiniboine and the Blackfoot and the Ojibwe Chippewa chiefs up there, Little Shell and Redstone, but they were up in Wood Mountain, Saskatchewan, and they were up in discussions, just weird things about why Chief Joseph had to surrender. It was because they weren't there. He went north to Montana, and all the peoples that had gone up into Canada, and it was because they were at a big meeting with the Métis, the mixed French and Scottish Indians who were in a rebellion and a war against the Crown of England when they had extended the dominion over all the tribes. So the Métis.
So he was teaching you all of this, and you were learning all this through.
Yeah. I was a teenager, and I learned the entire history over there about what had happened, why they were there, and your grandfather's, Red Bear and his sisters. This is who they were, and they were up in Wood Mountain trying to determine if they would go to war against the British with the Métis, and they decided not to. It was because of Nehiawat, the Blood Confederacy, this alliance that we had, where this family, which was my family, was like married between all these tribes.
How did you feel when you were hearing this for basically the first time? Still a teen.
That was amazing. I'm like 15, 16 years old. And all of a sudden I'm hearing like my families were running in circles with like these great chiefs, and they were great chiefs, and they were, this is your bloodline, and this great chief and his three sisters are your grandmothers. They created your great grandma, that you're sacred, and and you have to care about this. You have to talk about.
Rewrote your identity, David. That rewrote your identity.
Oh yeah, and I had a lot of pride in it. I'd look at my situation, and my grandma Patty would tell me on the phone. She'd be like, she'd say, you don't have it any worse than our ancestors did. And she'd talk about how it felt for her, to have her entire history taken from her, and then she's in her early 20s as a failing mother, having to reconnect through her mother and father about what was going on, and how these things are stripped from us. And then when you try to go home and you try to reconnect and fulfill your obligations and responsibilities, there's this big group of people trying to tell you that you don't have the right. And yet I wonder, if the earth had been invaded by Mars, and for 400 years or 200 years or 100 years, they called all of you Martians. Whether it was 100, 200, or 500 years later, wouldn't you have the right to say that we're Earthlings? Sure. And this is my home. Yeah. And so that's how it started for me. And then I, so when I graduated high school, I was a super runner. And my grandmother would tell me, and my grandparents weren't there. My mom's parents were on a mission in Nauvoo. And my grandpa's telling me when he's talking to me, that, the Book of Mormon's about your family. So learn everything about your family, because maybe you'll be able to tell me how true it is. It really is. And I always wanted to be able to tell him how true it really was. And I was able to do that before he died. And but he's the guy that used to drive me to powwows and used to drive me out there, and he cared that he's like, you have to learn, you have to know, because he wanted to know. Like he knew, but he wanted to know. And I was his key to figure that out. But so I was a runner. I was very good. I was the North Idaho mile and 2 mile champion. And then I went to the Junior Olympics for Region 13 in the Northwest, which was Washington and Oregon and Idaho and Montana and California, Northern California. And I won the 5,000 meters and went to nationals and tried the, I just wasn't, it was down in California. And this is where strange happenstances happen, where I raised the money and then I ran the 2,000 meter steeplechase with my brother to help him qualify.
Wow.
And I ran with him the whole way and he got third. And then I sprinted at the end, got second. I could have won the thing, but I was just trying to get him there. And so he went to nationals in the steeplechase with me. And so we went on town, raised the money, and then we went down to California, and we only had enough money to stay in campgrounds. And so we stayed in a KOA.
Well, you're used to that. That's okay.
You think there's one complaint from me? No, no, not at all. And so we're in a campground, and I want to go run on the beach. And this is where another life insertion happened that was so random, coincidental, that at the same time that we're down there, they were finishing Chief William Commanda. And he had a story, in 1920, this is important confluence of events and why I am what I'm doing right now. In 1920, Woodrow Wilson had formed the League of Nations. And so all of the Indian tribes formed the Indian League of Nations, and they tried to petition to join it because they thought that the world would help alleviate what was occurring to us. And Woodrow Wilson in the United States vetoed their entrance. So 10 years later, the government removes the right of traditional and hereditary and matriarchal leadership in communities and forces BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs constitutions, and strips away the rest of what was culturally sacred to us. And so in 1944, and we were heavily, it was very difficult. Nobody could raise their kids. Nobody could speak their language. Nobody could sing a song. Nobody could.
Literally. Illegal.
Literally. People forget that Alcatraz, an island, was formed as a prison to hold Hopi fathers who wouldn't turn their kids in. And that's what Alcatraz was initially, was a prison for Indian fathers who refused to turn their children over. How can you do this to me? And so in 1944, as the war's ending, the United States declares they're going to reform the United Nations in a different way, the United Nations. And so believing that last time we tried in 1920 as many nations, we'll try to join as one voice. So 200 nations gathered, and they formed the North American Indian Nation. And they elected a presidency of 3, Chief Jules Sioe of the Algonquin, and Chief Bernard Commanda and William Commanda of the Anishinaabe of Gittigan-Zibi First Nation. And we petitioned as one voice of 200 nations to join as one voice. And we had 2/3 of the United Nations said yes, and the United States vetoed it.
Yes.
And then Canada declared them terrorists and rebels and arrested them, the leaders. In 1956, after Jules Sioe and William Commander's brother Bernard had served as the Grand Chief of Turtle Island, that headdress from 1920 was passed to William Commanda. Morningstar was his name. In 1956, and he carried that headdress until 2011 as the Grand Chief, and people can Google him. But in 1995, 96, they started walking across the country to call the Creator to remember their cries and pleas, that we need some fire to be lit, something to remind us that we're close to an age of redemption, that we're clearly a remnant at this point. of what we
You're
used to
thinking
be.
about those promises made.
You
Yeah.
made promises. They walked, and they had reached the beach on the California coast the very day I ran out of that KOA campground and took a left on the beach and started running down the sand until I ran into a big, big grouping of Indians. And I was the only boy there. And I was taken by a man named Tom Dispelling. He was an Abenaki who was mistreated his whole life. You know, his tribe was unrecognized by the executive branch in the mid 1940s and 50s. And so all of a sudden he was told, and his families, that they're not Indian. People forget that the United States is a and I say this, and I don't understand why I have to keep repeating it to people, that they forget that it's a three co-equal branches is the federal government.
Yeah.
Congress is the federal government. The judicial is the federal government. And the executive is the federal government. That there's 975 right now, 975 nations that have treaties with Congress. 975 whose treaties are upheld by the Supreme Court, but only 575 that are recognized by the Department of Interior and Bureau of Indian Affairs to receive services. So are you saying the four, and many of those had theirs taken away and had to spend money they didn't have and go into poverty generationally just to get re-recognized, to get minimal services, like
But
the
the
right to go to a
Bureau's
hospital.
making those decisions without Congress. As
That's
I
right.
understand it.
And so I even yes. So even I think about my personal family. And so this is why when I got attacked, it was so offensive.
Yeah.
You know, Tom Dispelling was told in the 1950s he wasn't an Indian. And then in 2011, they re-recognized his tribe. And all of a sudden he's an Indian. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? If you don't know, I'm not talking to you, but
I understand.
if people don't know, they shouldn't speak. And certainly if they tell the Jew who went through their struggle and real tragedy in the 1940s, that even today, no one would go on public record and talk about how they should stop complaining about it or had no right to speak about it, even though they're great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren who didn't go through it. We're talking about my father, my grandmother, my grandfather, my great-grandparents. And if I'm the first generation able to speak with these things lifted when I was 4 months old, then who are you to even speak on record, on video? And I'm not speaking to you, I'm speaking to those watching this about anything without accountability.
You mentioned this. I have to ask this. I'm sorry to interrupt it, but you say
I'll tell you what
the
happened.
first
Yeah.
time as a generation able to speak. What initiated that? It was shut down legally with these laws, but what happened that you're the generation that can speak about it? I just need to educate myself. As what's happened that now lets you do that? For
some reason, in 1978, starting in the summer, what's weird for me is I look at things and I go, that's strange. Someone pointed it out to me, and I didn't know. I was like, oh, that's weird. Literally in the spring that I was born. So I would really in the spring that for some reason Congress felt pressed in the spring of 1978 until August of 1978 to make amends for all the bad ways that the Indian was treated. They started discussions on the Indian Child Welfare Act to save children and let them stay with their family. The Indian Health and Welfare Act let Indians go to hospitals because they couldn't prior. The Indians Religious Freedom Act to allow them to speak their language, to practice their culture without committing a federal crime. And then these were all passed at the exact same time in August of 1978. I was 4 months old. It's weird.
So that's really why weird. You say now, what you can say. Okay.
So I say, well, then that means I was the first generation born that had the ability to not know what it's like it was for my father or grandparents or great-grandparents. And
this is a different legacy than them. Yeah.
That's right. Now, granted, growing up as a kid in the community I grew up in, I was very aware that I was the them and they were I was the us and they were the them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when I got good in athletics, and just because I looked like an Indian, there were parents that wouldn't let me play with their kids.
Yeah.
I remember my friends taking me and they remember today, taking me to their home and their parents making me leave.
Yeah, that's
Because
uncommon. That it's 50-50. People are 50-50 and they're scared of the unknown, and it's human nature and it's sad. The natural man does stupid things. So I hope I would never do that to you or anyone, but I'm not perfect. But I apologize for those that did, because it's wrong, David. And I
yeah,
know it's wrong.
absolutely. We're going to stay. I'm going to grab a power cord while we talk. Hey, listen, this is about as in-depth as people are going to get with me ever, and I'm glad it's with you.
Oh, that's kind.
But I'm a regular human being.
Oh.
And so but I got to tell you what happened. So here I am. I'm this teenager who's just happy to be at nationals. And as I plug in my phone, just bear with me here.
You bet.
And I run into this grouping of Indians, and immediately this Indian with like, he's an Indian, his whole face is an Indian, but he's got like white and blonde hair. And he grabs me and he said, where'd you come from? And like he was told, this is strange stuff.
Now it's stopped. There you go. You're good.
There you go. Yeah, I just plugged in. So I'm a teenager, and I'm only like 2 years into working with elders. And I'm now in the middle of all these Indians, and I'm like, hey, I'm an Indian. My elders are at the Nez Perce Indian Reservation, and my grandma's over at the Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation.
You're about 17? You're about
just literally, yeah, I was just turned 17.
Okay.
This was 2 months after, or like literally 2 months after, just over a month into the second month after.
Early 17, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, I am too. And immediately they said, you have to come see Elder Commanda. And he starts because he just said, this happened. He just said that a little boy's coming to meet us. He just said, like this is movie stuff, you know.
I was just thinking this would make an incredible movie.
Like that stuff is weird stuff, and I'm very aware that it's weird stuff. Yeah. And so I get taken to this old man, and he asks where I'm staying, who I am, and I tell him where I'm at, and where's your mom, where's your dad? My dad's in jail. How do you feel about that? And I tell him, I hate my dad. I hate my dad. And he looked at me and he says, he lost a son too. He said that. He lost a son too.
He did.
And he said, he told me every boy needs a father. And every father needs a son. Give him a chance. I remember he told me that. And that the anger that I have is from the European. And the kindness that I have is from my ancestors. So focus on that. I'll never forget it. And from that moment, Tom Dispel was my elder. He never stopped being in contact with me. And 95. And no matter where I was for the rest of my life, he always found me. This is that man I literally ran right up to. And I read now about his journals and his things, and about when he walked across and he was like the general. You know what I mean? And he was on the council of Commanda with guys like, William's adopted, son Jim Davis, and who was an Abenaki, Lenape, and these guys, they just kind of took me under their wing through the late 90s and all the way until they passed away in 2018, and then Tom last July. Tom's wife, calls me son, and Tom's daughter Emma, we call each other brother and sister. And he was significant amount, and he connected me with the Wawadi family, who were running the lodges up in William Commanda's First Nation. There's a principal elders in the Midday We Win, the Middu, the teachings of the people of the star that came 2,500 years ago, whose symbol is 2 stars of David overlapping. Yeah. Lodges that are exactly in the same order as if you go into a temple. Very strange stuff, but I didn't know that till later. So I meet these people, and they're talking about how they walked across the country for the Creator to hear their place. So, and then I went to nationals, or then I went to the next day to run in nationals, and I tried to lead the whole way and got humbled in the last 2 laps, and just realized there's a lot of other people just as fit as you. Yeah. And so then I did not take a scholarship anywhere. I went to work at like a fire restoration place. As a strange kid, they had a reunion. My grandparents came back right as I graduated. Had a big reunion, because the Mormons have reunions. She had a big reunion. And I remember one of my uncles asking me, "What are you going to do? You're going to go to school?" You're going to sit. And I remember saying, "I'm going to wait till God tells me what I'm supposed to do. You're going to be 50 with nothing." And and there's something to that, because I didn't know what to do other than what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so then I made a mistake where I answered an ad in a news heavy internet. Then maybe it was there, but it wasn't big. And I answered an ad for traveling the USA. I wanted to travel the USA. And with a friend of mine, we got on a Greyhound bus and ended up at a place where we're with a guy in a strange life, where somebody who sells magazine subscriptions door to door. And I can't get home. And so it took me 9 months to work across the country before I could get home.
Wow.
And I had to learn to talk. And I had a difficult time talking even then. But because I had to go door to door to sell a magazine to get enough money to be able to, because they take everything from you. But to get enough money to go home, I committed myself to being able to be the best at that. And then I realized I could talk a lot better, more than before. But practice. It was like, and I took it as that, and I didn't take it personal when people shut the door, because you're there to try to sell a magazine. And it was just as abusive and strange.
Yeah, it proved to be
What's
a gift in your life. I said it proved to be a gift in your
A
life.
gift. Repetition. Now, granted, I saw the worst of people, the people that manage these kids like cash cows.
Sure.
But I took it as an opportunity that I was able to, and I met a young lady, and we escaped at the same time with, and we were able to save up enough they give you a little bit of money each week, and saved up $500 after 9 months, and making them people like $1,500 a week. But and then we jumped on a plane. I didn't even have an ID, and I could get on a plane. I could get a ticket and get on a plane. And we went to her family's house in Arkansas, and then from there contacted my uncle, who got me a Greyhound ticket to come be with him in Oregon, and said, "I'll give you a year. Your brother's already here preparing for a mission." My twin. And so I left the girl and went there and went immediately and sat down with the bishop, Ronald Browning. I'll be transparent. You're looking for a perfect guy. It's not me. I sat down with Ronald Browning and I said, "Hey, I had violated morality, and I had been with this girl who was like my best friend." And then I did my period of time of overcoming that.
Yeah.
And then I was with my aunt and uncle, Ron and Kathy, love them to death. And he was an electrician, and she was worked in a genealogy for the church, and they were the most spirit-filled home I've ever been in my entire life. And they gave me a place to breathe, and they said, "We should have taken you when you were children," that they were there when we were born, and looking back, they should have taken us. We were supposed to be their kids, but now we're both there. And my brother was incredible. He was the best talker I ever saw in my life, and I worked at a place called Office Max at night. Is this okay to talk about?
It's wonderful. I'm enjoying it. I'm seeing who you are. I see you, so please. Yeah, it's good, David. Really, it's good.
I worked at a place called Office Max at nights, and saved all my money for half a year, and then I paid for myself to take a semester of college at Portland Community College.
How old were you at this time?
So I'm like 20.
Okay, I was talking about 20. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, 20. And I was okay with what, I had graduated. After I graduated, I turned 19. They held me, remember when I couldn't talk, they held me back a year.
Yes,
They
okay.
actually made us
All right.
repeat one of our grades.
Okay.
And I feel bad for my twin that he had to do that because I couldn't talk, but they did that. And so I was 18 through my senior year. And then right after I graduated, or maybe it was a week before we graduated, I turned 19. And then I, disappeared across the country, going door to door, learning how to meet people, learning states and learning North America. And I went everywhere. And from all the way to the Northeast in Vermont, all the way to the South in Florida, and all the way to Texas and California and in between. just trying to get enough money to get back to Idaho. And I ended up with my aunt and uncle in Oregon. And with my grandmother wanting me to come to North Dakota. And my Uncle Dave and my Uncle Rick had become Mormons. And they pleaded with me to stay with my aunt and Uncle Ron and Kathy and to stick with Mormonism. And so I took 5 classes at the university and I got all A's. And I said, oh, and I did math and said, oh, this will take, I'll be 29 when I graduate. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. And then my twin went on a mission in August of 2000. And then in January in December of 2000, I had a dream. They were pressuring me all fall to go on a mission. And I'm going to tell you something remarkable that happened. They were pressuring me to go on a mission. And I just felt that I should feel that I should know that I should go.
Sure.
But they kept telling me that you just do it because you're obedient. Let's talk about Nephi. And I'm like,
that's a tough one, David. Yeah.
So I had a dream. And I tell many people I had a strange dream where I was in complete darkness that I've never seen before. And when I looked, and I was awake, and when I looked down, I saw yellow footprints. And the very morning I woke up, I went to the library at Portland Community College and I typed it into a search engine called Excite.
I remember Excite.
And it pulled up like pictures from Marine Corps boot camp. I immediately went to the Marine recruiter and told him I had to join because I had a dream. And he thought I was crazy, but I was very athletic and I scored like a 98 or a 99 out of 100 on the ASVAB. And plus I had like this like super ridiculously high IQ test from when I was 12, 13 years old.
Yeah.
And so they took me to MEPS, and within 2 weeks I'd been through MEPS, and within 3 weeks on January 28th, 2001, I was on a plane flying to San Diego, California, Marine Corps Recruit Depot. And I only had my Aaronic priesthood, and I didn't tell anybody I was going because I didn't want them to talk me out of it. And I showed up, and they had to stay at the airport till it was nighttime. And then they took us out there and we walked off the buses in pitch black and stood on yellow footprints. And I immediately said I was supposed
on the sidewalk or on the.
Yeah. Now, when I was there, I went to church. I went to church. I met in my. I still get stuck on words. In my platoon was a Marine named Matthew Brinkerhoff, who was wanting to escape his mission.
Mm-hmm.
And I drug him to, it's just really strange. And my drill instructor, Zachary Lott, was also a Mormon. He found out I was on the quarter deck just getting destroyed, and they had to call off. I was an idiot, and I was really physically fit, and I did really good on the intake, and they asked me and they called me in the middle of the night on the first day and asked what I thought about it. And I said, this recruit thinks it's easier than I thought it would be. And so they decided to show me.
Not so easy.
Yeah.
No.
And where I couldn't lift my arms, but we had the reports, where we were going on Sunday, and I say LDS, and he told, and then, I got you. And so me and Matthew Brinkerhoff started going to church every Sunday, and then the groups got bigger. And I met branch president Victor Bippersten, and who just wrote me in the last week. And really strange, he found me. And I did that. And then on the day I graduated, and by the way, and I did call home and let my aunt and uncle know. And I was very sad that, and I know it's probably not fair to say now, but I will say it, that sometimes when you're LDS and people don't do what you think they should do, doesn't mean they're not doing what God thinks they should do.
I agree with that, David. I agree.
And I was told, when I got there, I was told, good riddance to bad rubbish.
Oh.
But the day I graduated, I proved that it was a vision of the Lord. I was picked up by Ronald Bibb, and no one came to my graduation.
Oh.
And I was standing there alone because everybody had left. And I was thinking, I got to go to the airport. And Victor Bibberston showed up, and he got me in, and he took me to get some food. And then he drove me to the San Diego temple, and I'm in my Marine uniform. And he took me he went in and then he came out and said, "Come with me, brother." And I went in with him, and I didn't have a temple recommend. I didn't even have my Melchizedek priesthood. And he took me, and I met President Clark, who was the temple president of the San Diego temple. And they took me back through into the back room and sat me down, and they gave me my Melchizedek priesthood, and they gave me my temple recommend, and I went through. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. And then I flew home, and then I went to and when I flew home, I had met my wife, who was and her family's from Hawaii and from Oregon, and she had known my uncle her whole life, but now she had decided to join the Marine Corps too because of me, and wanted to be with me. Now I'll say that it's tough. I don't want to talk about marriages or anything like that because it was stripped away. And according to the record, it doesn't exist. And those are for other reasons that would occur 10 years later.
Okay.
So I won't talk about it because it's too hurtful to talk about. But I ended up going to ended up going from there. So to that point, I knew that I was on the trail that I was supposed to be on. And I called my Indian grandmother, and she told me that I was an Ogichida, you're a warrior, this is in your blood, that's why you're always smiling, and you're doing this is what we're supposed to be doing. Fantastic, right? And my great uncle was a Marine, and he was like Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Silver Star, like Superman, who he was just my great uncle's amazing. He was, he's just incredible. He formed the first ever Indian-owned bank in Indian history, and then the U.S. federal government cut off all their access outside of the reservation. So they never give us a chance to be independent, but always dependent. So if you want to know if communism works, go see how the Bureau of Indian Affairs manages tribal reservations. It's proof communism does not work.
Yeah.
Socialism and communism. So anyways, I travel the country to combat training, and in combat training, and I just want you to know, and are we okay to keep talking about this?
You're good. It's just your story. That's want to see how you led up to who you are. So it's part of it.
Yeah. So I go to combat training, and I'm down in Camp Pendleton, California. And the first day I show up, there's myself, there's, I've been talked to since then, but I just remember that it was just myself and a guy who was in boot camp with me. His name's Esqueda, and then just an entire platoon of African Americans. And I was like, I'm an Indian, because, and he's like, I'm a Mexican. But we had to pick, by consensus, the corporal and Sergeant Puffer, who was the instructor. He had told everybody that organize yourself into a platoon, pick 4 squad leaders and a guide. Obviously, that we were outnumbered, so it was it was their group that was leading. The very next morning, the second day, we had to do a 12-mile forced march up the mountains, and in the middle of the night, it started downpouring rain. This happened. And Major Edson was the head of the School of Infantry at the time. And so I'm going to name names of people who can say if this did or didn't happen. His name was Sergeant Puffer, and Major Edson was the head of the School of Infantry. And that next morning, we had to go up the mountains, and it was raining so bad. And we thought they'd cancel it. No, they didn't cancel it. And we're walking through a torrential downpour straight to the mountains. And if anyone's been to Camp Pendleton and to the School of Infantry, it's this, and it's just mud. And so and he doesn't care. Major Edson came from the family of the Edson from World War II, Edson's Raiders. And he didn't have any cares to give. He was going to break us for a reason, to show us the bar, the standard. And somehow we strung way out to where I looked back and I couldn't see anybody. And I was on the left, and I was the only one left on the left. And on the right, there was the guide with the guide on and Major Edson. And then this happened. And the guide fell, and the guide on was falling. And the major yelled back and said, "Grab that stick." And so I went over full pack, and I had incredible endurance. And I grabbed the guide on, and I stayed with him all the way to the end. And he gave me an MRE. He shook my hand and let me go sit down and eat. And it was hours before anyone showed up. And then when we marched back, to a place. We loaded on vehicles and they drove us down. And this was important. This was such a significant thing for me that now I was the guide and I had earned it. And not only that, he stood me in front of everybody on a platform as all of the other School of Infantry units walked by. And then he had said, "It looks like we found the guide." Like, and from there, I was the leader. But I spent most of my time helping everybody, making flashcards. And then we had our combat games at the end. And so you go out for about a week. And so but that's how it happened. Strange thing. And no one gave anything to me. And so we have the combat games, and we have to go out into a scenario where you're in 2 camps and you're taking patrols and you're going out and doing real, fire maneuver, and you're trying to infiltrate the other unit and you're trying to capture their flag. It's really like that.
Kind of a war game.
War games. And in the first night it was over. and I was a part of it. So Sergeant Puffer comes and grabs me and he goes, "Major Edson's coming out with us. So this is what we're going to do." And he gave, you go and they give you an operations order and they give you the plot, the directions. Well, he plotted them and he did it on the map upside down. But I don't know this. I'm just walking with him and we're all strung out and we're doing a patrol and we're trying not to walk into an ambush. And we ended up, we're up by a freeway, and he comes to me, he says, "Stop, everybody gets down, they're laying down. You can look over the valley, it's pitch black." And he said, Sergeant Puffer pulls me aside and he says, "I took us the wrong way." And he goes, he's alive. And he goes, "This is going to be really bad for me." And so I said, "Well, I grew up in the wilderness and all these thick thistles." I said, "The water runs downhill." And I showed him how there was like a space, like a small space. And I said, "I'll be back." And I crawled all the way down it with my weapon. And we went down 100 meters down a hillside, like thistles, right above me, low crawling. And I came to a creek. And when I came out, the creek came out into some tall grass. And then I crawled back up and I said, "We're going this way." And I had an entire platoon crawling down.
It was him that made the mistake. He wasn't trying to pull one on you. He had made a mistake.
He screwed up.
Okay.
And so then I saved the day, and now we're crawling down this thing, and we're crawling through, and then we end up in a stream, and we're all low crawling through a stream, and then we come up, and I walking through some thistles and some bushes, and then there's this log, and we're walking across this log in pitch black over like a marsh, and it just happened. And then and Major Edson's low crawling down this hillside. Okay. Yeah. And then I hear talking. So I halt everybody, I go tell them, and we had walked right behind an ambush that was set up along the road. And we captured them. Walked right up behind them and captured all of them. And then we used them to walk into their base and get their flag and walk back to ours, and ended the whole thing the first night.
That's an awesome story. That is great.
And it graduated, and Sergeant Puffer and Major Edson told me that it was the greatest experience they've ever had at the School of Infantry. Right. It happened. That's so awesome. I got meritoriously promoted there, and I got pulled out in front of every single person at graduation day, all by myself out in the front, and got meritoriously promoted to Lance Corporal. And so now from there, I fly to, and that happened. So I fly to across the country to North Carolina to Camp Johnson, and I just loved the Marine Corps. Honor, courage, and commitment.
How many years were in there? How many years?
At this point?
Yeah, or the total, how many?
I did from 2001 to 2013 active duty and 2013 to 15 reserve. So 14 years total.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah. So with 1 year and 4 months and 24 days overseas. So yeah.
You've been through it. You did.
So, but if I can tell you some more remarkable stuff, it was okay. Because this is like, are we okay?
We're okay.
So I fly to Camp Johnson, North Carolina, and they got to do a fit, and they put you in barracks, and it's really a lot more relaxed. And there's like the administration schools are there, the mortar transport schools are there, the supply chain and logistics schools are there, and there's like 500 people, and they have a physical fitness test the first morning, and I win it. Okay. And so I was going all out, and they had a runner from the Marine Corps running team that was there, and he beat me, but I made him earn it. I made him earn it. And so I got called out. This is a strange thing. I got called out in front of everybody, right in front of everybody. And there's Marines alive today that know that this happened, and talked about how I didn't show up there and, give half effort, that I gave full effort. And so we had to change over and go form up to go to our meet our instructors. And so I go change over and we walk out and we're standing. Now there's like 6 platoons all lined up. And in our platoon, there's a corporal and other lance corporals and corporals. So they step into now there's a platoon sergeant. And then there's a guide and 4 squad leaders. And I just step into the middle and I'm there. And something had happened the night prior that I didn't know about, because the staff sergeant walked out and he told the guide and the squad leaders and the platoon sergeant to get to the back. And then he turned and walked off, and we stood there for about 15 minutes, not moving, not knowing what to do. And I felt the prompting, and I stepped out from the middle, and this really happened. And I stepped out in the middle. And so I got awards to talk about. They can contact people. It happened. And I walked out and turned and I called everybody to attention, and I right faced them and I forward marched them, and I started calling cadence like drill instructors. Left, right, left, right, left, column right, Hodge. And I did movement, and everybody, and this really happened. People came out on the balconies as we were marching, and were like Marines, like fleet Marines. And as I took them to class and took them in, and I, when you're dismissed, this will happen. I went in and I just took control, and got challenged by one guy. And I turned and said something so forcefully to him that it shocked him, and he fell under a chair. And then we had the best class that and this happened, the best class that they've ever had there. At that time, they said this is the most disciplined class, but I just had earned it. And so I graduated as honor graduate, and I got pulled aside by Gunnery Sergeant Smith. And he said, "You get to go wherever you want to go." "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Where do you want to go?" And so I chose Hawaii. And so then I I went to Hawaii Marine Corps Base, Kaneohe Bay, and checked into my unit, 3rd Combat Service Support Group 3. And within 6 months, I was meritorious corporal. In my first 12 months, for 11 months, I was Marine of the Month, Marine of the Quarter for my company, the battalion, the regiment, for the base. And then in year 2, by 2 years, and I had a daughter named Nohealani, who was the first Hawaiian born back in Hawaii. And gave her a Hawaiian name, born right there in Kailua. And then in 2 years, at the 2-year mark, I was selected. I won the base competition to go for meritorious sergeant, and they took Master Sergeant Stephen Griffin. He was the acting first sergeant for my company, and I beat all the battalions and regiments on Marine Corps Base Hawaii. And they flew me to Okinawa, Japan, to compete for the 3rd Marine Division, 3rd Force Service Support Groups, Meritorious Sergeant Board, where I was going to compete against the top from the whole Pacific for physical fitness test, drill competition, rifle range, oral board, uniform. And I won every single event. And it happened. And I did running command on the drill card. I did it about 50 yards, and it happened. And Major Matthew J. Puglisi and Master Sergeant Stephen Griffin knows it happens. And Master Sergeant Stephen Parker and Gunnery Master Sergeant Bam, they all know, and that happened. And so I was promoted by General Neller, who would later become the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And I was now 2 years in, and I was meritorious sergeant, and I got pulled aside and said, "You want to go to college?"
Nice.
So I got selected to go to the Citadel in South Carolina. And Major Puglisi said, "You need to go to a regular school. You need to dial it way back." So because I was very obsessively compulsive.
You were hyper, I bet. Yeah.
I was all in. I felt that I was where God wanted me to be. And but anyways, so while I'm in Hawaii, I get a phone call from my brother who just got done with his mission. And my mother in Florida had asked him, and this is right before this is why I chose to go to the University of Utah. My mother's living in Florida, and my brother just got done with his mission, and he was called to come down and for her baptism.
Oh, okay.
And so he flies down there, and I get a phone call from him all frantic because the missionaries who had been going to her house and sitting in her house and teaching her, that the missionary there who thought he was me was Matthew J. Brinkerhoff, the guy who I had gone to boot camp and drugged him to church and got him to get off on his mission.
That's something.
And he ends up being a part of my mom's baptism. And so I said, maybe I did go on a mission.
You did.
And that happened. And what happened, I was blessed in the midst of it to get my Melchizedek priesthood in a temple. So that happened. So I chose the University of Utah where my brother was at, and I got to meet him and his family, and he had kids, and I graduated in 2 years, the Bachelor's of Philosophy, graduated from Officer Candidate School as an honor graduate, set the endurance course record at the time in Quantico, Virginia. And anybody that knows the endurance course there, I set the record in the summer of 2005. And I did that. That happened. And
Awesome.
and while I was in school, I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you it happened.
It's the facts. It's awesome.
Yeah,
So good.
and it meant a lot to me, and I worked hard for it. And they didn't believe the first time I did it, they didn't believe me. They thought I cheated. So they lined the court the next morning, they lined the course with the other cadets, and they had me redo it. And I ran 30 seconds faster. And but I knew the course, and I had good endurance. And then while I was there, I got selected to staff sergeant out of the below zone, which is a meritorious promotion to E6. Now you're a senior NCO, you're a careerist, they can't get rid of you, and you're sitting in the big billets, and now the Marines are yours. And I chose that over my commission because I didn't want to spend a couple years as a lieutenant, and then I would always have a staff sergeant who managed the Marines, gunnery service. So I took that, and I was told I was like one of the very first people to not choose to fight for a commission. So I was sent from there overseas to Japan, where I was in Camp Schwab, Okinawa, Japan, in running pre-deployment training for 4th Marine Regiment and also covering for 3rd Recon Battalion supply chain and logistics as they were in Afghanistan. And their remain behind element, I had to get ready to reconstitute the UDP unit deployment program. And I did that with Colonel Scott Fosdell. And then from there, I got sent to instructor duty in Spokane, Washington, where I finished my master's degree and was in the church chaplaincy program and was a ward mission leader.
And you were a good one.
That was pretty dang good. But I had a different view.
Sure.
I could see how when I held the book up, I could say, like, this is my family.
That's a great story. Yeah.
And so from there, my life kind of altered drastically. And I chose at that point to step away from the church.
And go focus on your Indian family versus
Yep, I was gonna focus on I'm going to my grandma.
And I know that there was an event that helped make that shift, and I don't want to dig too much into or even into it, but there's obviously something that shifted for you, David, and your heart was pressed to go a different direction, and I respect that. I don't know if it'll help folks. It doesn't really need to
Human beings.
us. I just curious what you would like to say about it or not. That's up to you.
Yeah, I just lost my marriage.
Okay.
And I lost that I didn't want to lose. And I lost my best friend that I didn't want to lose.
Yeah.
And these are two separate people. Very difficult, very challenging time.
Okay.
And there's the second counselor at the time, was Alan Seaman, just say his name. And he understands, how much I hurt at that time about what was happening.
And you went to a family that you really felt connected with, that side. If I understand, your heart was really being pulled to that, to go re-establish identity. Am I assuming something here that's not true?
I just gave up. I wasn't prepared to separate the people from the gospel.
Okay.
But they were still integrated. And so
that makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Forgetting that, like, people, listen, every human being is going to let you down, especially if you're looking for a fault.
That's a true statement. Yeah.
So, but at the time in my growth, it was all together.
Yeah.
And so I prayed and prayed and prayed and felt that it was time to go over, and then to be told that I couldn't be in the chaplaincy program because I wasn't married anymore.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I felt so hurt.
It's a tipping point in your life.
Because I was working so hard for this.
Yeah.
And from there, I said, what do I do now? So they sent me to, and it was while I was there, and part of that, in the middle of that process, before it had happened, I had been sat down by my first sergeant, Dana Clark, and said that, do you know this young lady, this lady's name? And I said, and this is while I was still married, and this is part of the problem that caused the strange separation. I'll talk about this. I had earlier, like back when I was in Hawaii, I had a strange call from that girl that I met and I knew back when I had traveled the country.
Yeah.
And she had a kid, and she had wanted to be with me. And something didn't work out with the guy she was with. And I was like, well, I'm married, And so it never really went further than that. And so now my first sergeant's telling me that this lady had killed somebody while intoxicated.
Oh my
with
goodness.
Children in a car, and was going to jail for 7 years, and was, had a bunch of kids with the guy, but didn't want her son to stay with the guy, even though the guy was his dad his whole life. And that she was declaring to the state that I was his father.
Oh.
And so I found out that I had to take a test. And so I found out that I had a 9-year-old son. And again, for all those that are looking for a reason to poke at David Midegah and say, oh, you're something wrong, the first thing I did is went to my Bishop Ron Browning and said I had violated my, what I had done. And I did what I had to do. I did the right thing. I went to a judge of Israel who had the authority to judge, and I let him judge.
Yeah.
And then I fulfilled the requirements, and then it's over. So, later in time, I find out. So I talked to my wife at the time about it and how we're going to take the kid. And she says no. And at all. And then, well, what happens when his mom's out? Well, she'll come stay by us. Maybe she'll stay with us for a little bit till she gets on her feet. And then the divide happened, and she starts talking with somebody else a lot. And then things happened.
It can get ugly. It can get ugly.
The serpent finds one division, usually somebody who doesn't like a situation, that talks to somebody else, and the serpent will jump in over there too.
They take advantage of that. Yeah, they take advantage of that stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so much so that the marriage we had in a temple doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And this is why I can't talk about it, because it didn't happen according to the Lord. And that's a challenge for me. So, but
he's a perfect judge, David. He's a perfect judge. I'm not judging. I don't have a right to judge. He's the perfect judge, and you have a relationship with the Savior, because that's what matters, is a relationship with Christ. This other is peripheral. So just know that I love you, and I appreciate you sharing what you did.
Yeah.
That you go forward, sir. Don't carry these chains and balls around everywhere. Don't do that. Okay.
No, I'm good. I'm okay. Because because the Lord wants our happiness, and when I stand in the ceiling room again, I know it will be forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but anyways, at this time, everything is within 6 months of finding out about him, everything is collapsed. And then I have his father, the guy he called dad, that he thought was his dad his whole childhood, his grandparents, his aunts and uncles. I have his brothers begging and pleading for me to let him stay in his family.
Yeah, boy.
And I said yes. And so they let me talk to him every week or two. And he stayed he's a young, the age of my son right now. And imagine if somebody had told me that he's not my son and he had to leave. It created great compassion for them to let him remain with me.
Yeah.
And so I did. And I went into pre-deployment training, and I deployed to Afghanistan, and I was filling a billet for the Department of the Navy. I was the critical procurement approving official certifying officer. I managed the only credit card offline program in Afghanistan for 100,000 Marines. I traveled like Charlie Sheen. I had unlimited ASRs. I went to like 79 units. Hey, Chief Warrant Officer Kenneth Glass, and Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Wedgwood, and Skip Rooney, and Gavin Whitehead, and Albert Kite. They know. And I wrote an analysis of, as a part of making decisions that were, even though I was somehow able to go into meetings of the 6 big colonels in the theater because of my position. I'm filling like a major's role, and I'm not attached to any, but I'm within a command, but I'm over a program for all commands. And the officers hated it.
I bet.
Because I had the officer candidate completion, I had the senior listed completion, and I'm in a billet for an officer stuck to another unit, but off doing whatever I want. And I wrote an analysis and did a great job of influencing things. And I wrote this analysis, and it got sent to the Department of Defense, and then it won the 2012 Operational Excellence Award for the All Services Department of Defense. And when I came back from Afghanistan, I was flown to meet the Commandant of the Marine Corps General Amos, who's also from Idaho, and got that cool picture on my Facebook with him. Invited my brother, who had been kicked out of the Marine Corps after a year, had a tragedy, became 100% disabled because of it. He had a horrific thing happen. He saw that something, I don't know why it happened to him, but I didn't talk about it. But he had tried to join and had within a year he was kicked out for a really tragic thing that happened. And which compounded what had happened as a kid. Now, granted, now they've 100% disabled him. So for, the issues that are associated, I'll leave that alone.
Yeah.
But he was there, and he got a nice medallion that now his son has. But met the Commandant, and then I was sent up to Headquarters Marine Corps Systems Command, where I stayed there until I got out, and then got out. And when I got out, I had crossed paths with my current wife in Germany at Marine Forces Europe and Africa doing an audit. And then over a period of time of a year, we fell in love, got married, had children, and got promoted. Within 5 years, I was a director outside of the Marine Corps. And then my life fell apart again. And
before you go into that, you were how old when you got out of the Marine, out of the Corps?
Oh, geez. I would have been 33 or 34.
Okay. In your early 30s. Okay. All right. And that fell apart. It had some challenges there. And I know
so 39, up to 39, it was fantastic. And then when I was 39, I was 3 months before turning 40. And it was February of 2018. And I had a young, we had our second son, Henry. I'm a director, and I'm living over in the Great Lakes. And my grandmother and my great uncle say, you got to come back to Turtle Mountain. And so I did. I went back, and she, she talked to me about how difficult it was in her life to know anything, and how, but it doesn't matter when you know, it's when you know.
Yeah.
But that I somehow kind of knew and always was involved and could talk about things and very well. And so wanted me to be a headman of our clan, a dudum. And whatever it meant, she loved Jesus. She had probably 40 or 50 pictures of Jesus on her walls, covering her walls. She loved Jesus, but she knew it was the great peacemaker. But she also loved her family history and wanted me to make more of it than what had up until that point. And so, it was a challenge though, because, some elders that I had died, and I really wanted to see them there, but went to a lodge, and this happened. So it was they held a lodge on our birthday, February 10th, 2018. And I went with my twin, and I won't talk about my twin here, but I went with my twin, and I went into the lodge. I was just kind of chuckling because as you go in, and they're holding the lodge in the back room of the Turtle Mountain Tribal Headquarters. They had just coup d'etat their chairman, and the council had kicked him out and taken over. And they had allowed the Midegah Lodge for the first time in their headquarters building. And we're a minority in that community. My family has an 1863 treaty where we're supposed to get a reservation or 640 acres in exchange for 11 million acres in Minnesota. And by 1892, it had never been provided 29 years later. And so now we're living at Turtle Mountain because they had created the state of North Dakota in November 2nd, 1889, even though they didn't own the land, repugnant to the Enabling Act of 1889 that said, and think about this, February 1889, the Enabling Act says we're going to make the North Dakota Territory into states. North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. But the U.S. has to own the land, and if they don't, the Indians have to willfully part for it for a price that they agree. In the summer, in July 1889, the Secretary of the Interior releases a statement that says that the northern half of North Dakota Territory is still owned by the Indians, and you need to negotiate with them for that. In August of 1889, Congress passes an appropriations bill to fund a commission to meet with the Pembina Chippewa to purchase their land to make the state of North Dakota. This would be everything north of the Cheyenne River, which cuts the state in half from the Missouri River. And so it's the northern half. They didn't own it. So 3 months into negotiations, they still make it a state, even though they don't own it, include the land, and settlers are flooding in, and they don't own it. And so this caused a problem from November of 1889 until January of 1891, where the Pembina Chippewa under Chiefs Little Shell, Chief Red Bear, Chief Red Thunder issued a statement and said, you know, we're not selling. So now we hit 1892. You have the Red Bear family, the Red Bear chieftainship living in Turtle Mountain, waiting for their reservation that's supposed to be 640 acres up in the northeast portion of North Dakota. That's within 9.5 million acres that's owned by these chiefs, Little Shell and Little Thunder and Red Thunder, that are at Turtle Mountain and Spirit Lake in the center of the state. And we're involved because we have like 640 acres in this big $9.5 million deal, or 9.5 million acre deal. And so we refuse to sell our 640 acres that we never received. And Little Shell refuses to sell his holdings. And so they get the Turtle Mountain group to agree to sell theirs in the 1892 Macomber Agreement. And because they couldn't abrogate the rights of Red Bear, they added an Article 8, that says Turtle Mountain's parting with this, but Red Bear is going to get his reservation. So it's like proof for separate. And then it still never came. So we hit the 19...
and I don't want to jump because we're on your time. I want to make sure you can get to your next meeting, but I know this, at the time that you were given and there's a right way of saying that you became the chief, that was about 2017, which is about 7 years from that, past from here. Yeah. And that's been your journey for those 7 years on your quest. That's what launched it?
Yeah, so it's strange. This is when I was, all of a sudden, there was no stepping aside. So from 2018, 3 months later, I turned 40. 1 month later, my wife's in Germany and is not coming back. She went to a wedding, is not coming back. I go to Germany, you know, over the summer, and my son turns 1 and she's staying in Germany. And so for the next 3.5 years till October of 2021, I'm in Germany trying to be a dad and fighting the German state who sees me like the Americans see the Mexican.
Yeah.
And I have 50% custody of my kids. And then we finally get my rights solved out. I'll go really quick. We get a time where I can travel, and now I can go back in October of 2021 and be confirmed at the Garden River Ojibwe Nation. Yeah. And I had the worst 3.5 years. And so then I go back to there, and we have a remarkable thing that happens above a sacred cave, and where I get my stone, my council fire rock, sacred stone, in a most remarkable circumstances that was not intended to happen. I was not intended when I came to even carry that thing out of there. But something happened when I was there. Then they were like, you're taking it. And so from there, I started working with the rabbis over the next couple. I listened to what had happened and what we were told to do. And then last fall, the rabbis finally explained to me the time period from Adam to David, and from David to when they know this age is going to transition, and that's this year. Yeah. And so they sat down and signed a proclamation last November and said, your 7 grandfather teachings and our 7 Noahide laws are the same, and we'll affirm that you received these things 2,500 years ago, because that's when you did. And they put our stars side by side, and they're my brothers. And we did a documentary, and then we rocked into this year. And the plan was for me just to go to, there's chiefs going everywhere, but I was going to my goal is to go to the Sami and to the Maori and to the Central America.
Try to unite them and gather them into a whole.
Yeah, one global, for 80 years, they've been working on uniting 400 global indigenous tribes into one body.
So that's really the quest that we're talking. I know this is the videos that I've watched. I wanted to say, I'm using the term quest, David, so that's just my term, but it's your quest that you've been on to inform Americans, to inform your own people, but to tell the world basically that this is what's going to happen. This is why we're coming together. The 7 fires, and we're coming close to the 8th fire or whatever. I know that your other videos have talked about that, but I wanted your story to get to a point where this is all led, David.
Yeah.
You know.
So now I'm fighting from 2021 to last summer for treaty rights in Washington, D.C. I'm a treaty chief, signatory, recognized under a congressional act in 1971, and Congress is the federal government.
Yes.
Who said these rights were abrogated because the U.S. Court of Claims said so. So we have to issue a resolution that says, well, what family speaks for the chieftain rights of Red Bear, and who will we recognize generationally as a treaty chief to speak on their rights? And so I'm fighting in Washington, D.C. for that. I'm a traditional headman of a dukedom working with the Midew traditional elders, and then in stark opposition to the 2-year elected guys that only care about our assimilation as a municipality into Canada and the United States. And then working with my responsibility to work with the rabbis to try to build that unity. And then also doing my part, which was with the tribes of Central and South America and those in the Pacific Isles and those in Northern Europe. And so this was my mission that we're doing, is trying to make one global governing body where we can speak and travel. We can have the same travel documentation, because right now we're at mercy of states that take all of our resources and then make us use their papers, and then they limit everything we do. Well, we want to take responsibility and accountability and be statesmen. We've tried twice before to join the United Nations. We've never been allowed. We've tried to unite our communities in the United States and Canada, never been allowed. So we're going to use the elected process. We're going to use a global unity. We're going to obtain our own systems. And we're going to try to explain to you that technology was given to take what took this period of time to do it in this period of time, to use the difference for you to spend with your families. And instead, that gift, they said it'll take this period of time down to this period of time. And instead, they took all of it and more. And now they're at war with your unborn grandchildren's right to have fresh air and fresh water. So this is what happened.
Yep, this is the question on. I have to say, to those of you who are watching this video, I suggest that you watch David's newest video. At least I thought it was the newest video. It's titled "The Native Chief Has a Message for America." And that's because, David, you share from your heart a number of points and teachings that for all of us that we truly need to hear. I've loved everything you said on that. Consider and reflect on it. You said, well, you've considered and reflected on this a lot, and that's why you step forward to doing what you're doing. And so I just appreciate to trigger us to go and consider. I don't know if your efforts are also to try to create some reparations, because they've taken millions and not. I just want to know what that is.
We don't want reparations.
Okay.
We don't want we don't want reparations. We want to be able to be held responsible, whether we succeed or fail.
You want your own identity.
Our own merit. We want to be able to sit at the table of the human family.
Okay.
The only thing that we're requesting, and somehow I was invited to an Ojibwe conference that turned out to be a Mormon conference that then was like, oh wow, it's should I speak to him? And my elders are like, you're carrying some scrolls. You are carrying a council fire rock that's significant. That's authority. You're carrying large feathers because of you're living the good way. You have fought the fight in federal courts for treaty rights. You know you're a keeper of songs and you're a keeper of history. So go talk to them and validate some things if it brings them their pole, their stick to the teepee to help build it.
I love that example. The three poles. I had that written down here, just so you know. I just think it's so beautiful that I forget the 3 words, and then you say the other poles can lean on those 3 principles, those 3 laws. Yeah, so beautiful.
What's the foundation of the priest? Those who have claimed a priesthood from God in the world. There are those of Aaron and to the Levites that, by the way, there's no record of Aaron or any of the 5 generations after him showing up and giving any of their Aaronic priesthood away. It still belongs to the Levites. And even today, I remind the church in your books, it says that if they show up, that they are automatically qualified to be bishops if selected. Yeah. That they have that priesthood. But we have a priesthood too that was given to us by those that came, my family lineally, that came in a boat when the lodge was destroyed, that integrated with our communities and brought the Midegah Lodge for a young boy who taught everybody.
You're talking about you.
Yeah. And the two girls that were with him that made the matrilineal dudems of the Moose and the Adik, which my grandmother descends matrilineal from. And that the Midegah Lodge has a star. They drew 2 sticks. It was a treaty. Our 2 sticks are bound as one in all directions. And when we draw it, it makes 2 stars of David overlapped. They put it on the proclamation. So we have a priesthood too. We've been executing our priesthood. It's recorded by the Jesuits in the 1640s. It's recorded in the 1850s by people who decided to put it down on paper, that these are interesting things they're keeping hidden from people, to keep them from being destroyed. That they said, go talk to them. So I go talk to them and I try to tell them, hey, that when we build the teepee, that the first mother gave this to us. Adam's not the only one that matters. So does his wife. And don't think that when he is standing there, when Jesus comes to greet him, that his wife's not going to be there with him. And the sacred mother. And that, we said that to stand the house of the human family together again, the teepee is the teaching of that. And that you have to have discipline, the rod of discipline, and you have to have the rod of respect, and you have to have the rod of humility. And we know that those who are disciplined is the priesthood of the Israelites who follow the 613 mitzvahs, and they're far more disciplined than any of us are. Then we have those that show respect, and that they took the house of the Lord and they honor it to the highest degree of everything they do. And we have lodges where we do the same thing, but it's not like that. The Mormon temples, that's respect. They're the rod of respect, priesthood of respect, the priesthood that was given to the Gentile to bring them into Israel. And then we have our priesthood, which was remembrance from where we came. Humility, that we're supposed to proclaim to our brothers and sisters that remember to play, even though you're the chief of creation, place yourself lower than it so it endures for your generations to endure as well. Because the strength of the mother is her generations that have a life on this earth. And so if we can come together, all we want is we want a language preservation university. All we want is a cultural center like you have for Polynesia, but for the North American Indian tribes, North Central and South America. And not only that, but to have another ring to it for all indigenous tribes of the world. Cultural center. All we want is a mental health and family assistance university-sized campus for us to restart, and not with those that are psychologists, but those who come with the spirit of the heart to help us know how to love again, be together again. That with love, get the families together and provide everything around them for them to just be able to focus their hearts on 2 generations together. Then they can step out and do the rest. That we would like a drug abuse and rehabilitation university-sized element so that all of our children, when we plant the teepee stands, can come home. And we know that in our communities, that is our biggest problem. We don't want to just bring them in and help them. We want to move them directly from rehabilitation into family and mental health, love and caring, and to integrate them back into their culture and their language so that then we can step out and show the world as the flower reopens that we can again be a sacred people, that our families can again be just as the Latter-day Saint families are, because that's how we were. But are you willing to commit a little bit of time to help us do that? That's what we want. That's reparations, to give us the ability. And we want to do it in the consolidated area where all rivers meet, where we used to gather from the south and the north and the east and the west, following, and we can go a little over, following from the west, from the Missouri River, and from the east, from the Ohio River, and from the north, from the Great Lakes down the Mississippi, Great River, and from the south up that we came to a place that you call Missouri, and I guess Joseph got lucky. But this was our central meeting place, and we need to restart there, where all the rivers meet, and we're asking for help. We need to go home. When the Ponce de Leon and the Spanish and the French and all these guys looking for the Fountain of Youth walked through there. When they saw us there in the 1600s and 1500s, they said they'd never seen anything like it outside of Rome and London. And yet in the 1800s, it was a ghost town. And now they try to identify these empty cities that are overrun by nature because of plague, genocide, and removal, that they try to say it belonged to somebody else. This was our home. And so we need to go back home, restart, and then we can move back out. And so that's what my mission is.
Well, that is well stated. That's what I wanted to actually have it culminate, to hear your story so that folks know who you are and where your heart is. You speak about the heart and seeing light in the heart in everybody, and I see it in yours, David. I just want you to know that this, because there's other videos people can go, but this really is a good culmination in what you've just described.
Yeah.
And I'm not a prophet, I'm not a soothsayer out there wondering in a crystal ball, but I know this, I'm a faithful member of the church, that I believe that our Savior is well aware of all of this. And what you shared, I believe the remnant that you speak of is spoken of in the scriptures. He's not forgotten them, and things are happening and coming together that one day, maybe sooner than we all think, the remnant's going to come and the tribes are going to come, and there's going to be great things that'll happen that will, oh my goodness, for those who understand and see what's happening. And I have every faith in that. And I can lock arms with you, David, in that hope and that goal. I have no reservation on that.
Yeah, and we don't, and now I'm a pipe keeper. I went to, our priesthood that was given to us, symbolic, was redstone and blackstone, the lower priesthood and higher priesthood, to remember. And we have a story about where that came from. Now I'm carrying a blackstone. It was given to me at that conference in Utah where I spoke the truth in front of about 1,200 people. And at the end, a man who had carried it for 75 years held it in the air, and it was a sacred moment for me that I had actually earned the right to carry a pipe that is 7 generations old from the 15 and 1600s. Yeah. I carry the council fire stone of the 3 fires people, that sacred stone that was gained from the mountain of Trap Rock. I carry a large tooth the size of a fist to remember my ancestors who had taken that from a giant, so that as a symbol to the world of who my family was. Yeah. And I ask anybody else have a big tooth like that? I don't think so. All I'm trying to say is to stop assigning titles to try to lift somebody up. I'm the same as you. I'm trying to inspire you. I'm a drop of water trying to inspire other drops of water to help form a cloud to make it rain. You might be the drop of water that makes it rain, which would make you sacred. I'm just the one reminding you of who we are in our sacred obligations, that we are spirits lowered. We're mostly there than here, that our spirits are gifts from the Creator placed within this temple, also a gift from the Creator, that we're supposed to record a vision and live the good way with the Creator intimately on this earth, in equity as the first mother and father. That's your promise and His obligation to you. The Creator is accountable to you. Your Father in heaven is accountable to you, and you step forward as Adam and Eve yourself, who we know the man called himself because he obeyed the Creator, and he named all things, even himself, kindness. And I am grateful that when they named me, and I made him write it down, by the way, because they named me at that ceremony, where I was named an Ogichidai headman. And oh, by the way, there are 70 people there who will also attest, and it really did happen, that about a 4-foot eagle landed on a car just outside the window and opened its wings. I know it sounds far-fetched and crazy, but it happened. And Alex Dakota and Debbie Gorno, pointing with their lips, know that happened. That I'm thankful that his name, Midegah, is in my name, Midegah, that I remember. And I didn't ask for that. I didn't write it down because I didn't believe it. I wasn't going to say it. And I stood up and read, oh, geez. We need to love each other as the mother loves us, because the great peacemaker, Jesus Christ, told us to love each other. And when we asked the question, because we chose to ask, then teach us how, He showed us a little extra and talked about His mother, that He remembered all things, and that the most sacred thing to Him, which will be to us when our life is cast before our eyes, will be the first memory we had, which was feeling and hearing her heartbeat. I'm not alone. And then realizing in excitement that heartbeat is inside you in unison. And you're baptized from her sacred water womb into this world. And isn't a baptism to return you to that sacred memory and starting place again? That we're supposed to love as that mother because her heart is in us. We're supposed to stand by our brother and sister, even if they commit murder, as the mother does with unconditional love. And if you are not called with the authority to be a judge of your fellow man, then your responsibility is to love unconditionally in all places at all times. Because if we do that, then we can restore the circle. And that's all we're trying to do. We just want you to get your stick and lean it with ours. That's all we'd like to do. But you know, in attacking my right to sit at the table of my family, because there are those that keep wanting to do this, isn't going to stop what God is doing with me and with you. All it does is reveals publicly and in video the reflections of your heart, which have a lot of scars. And I hope that when we build our center, you'll be the first ones to show up so we can heal your center, which is your heart, because you're welcome too. You're Anishinaabe also. You're a spirit lowered. You're Oji Chagwan. You're a spirit in the body, and you are also Ojibwe. You're recording a vision. Set aside the languages that are changed at the tower, and remember we're saying the same thing, that we're one family. You're in my tribe.
Well, David, I so appreciate you. I think you have a song or a poem you want to end this with. Why don't you do that, and then I'll close it up. But thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry. So the song's is a prophecy song, and it's when we weren't allowed to go and pray, we'd meet in the dark, and the elders would sing the prophecy song that was supposed to be saved for the 8th age. They would sing it then. And they'd say, if we remember this, then we'll remind them when we know we're in the 7th age, before the 8th age, when we're leaving the dark, when the sun is going to rise and return. That we would declare, and they would sing this, come, let us go. Before the sun rises, they will know that we have given our prayers. They will know that we have given our prayers. And so, you know, this is, I'm singing this now. Okay. Ambe majada jibwa bida beng kiga nimegumen kaina gonem geing homa kiga nimegumen Amba majada jibwa bida ben kiga nimigumen kaina gonem geing homa. Miigwech.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. This has been wonderful. All right, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time to watch this, and I hope it's answered some questions and you get to see the heart of David, you know, Chief Midegah. And I certainly have to tell you that I'm growing in love for him and his goals and his desires. And I hope that you'll join me in praying for him and for us, that we can find that oneness that he teaches and that he talks about. So until next time, I wish you continued success. Goodbye.
But Mapi.
Yes, indeed.